Good morning and welcome to Coffee with the Coach. Today we are speaking about motivation. My name is Tony DiGuida and we have Coach Milu, Dr. Milu, and a special guest with us today, Mark Brown, who is a lawyer for small business owners. And I'm sure large business owners as well.
Few of those.
As you grow your business, you will definitely need the services of a lawyer. And, how does this relate to motivation? Well, small businesses need to stay motivated every day, and legal issues can certainly help you lose some of that motivation. So tell me, Mark, how do you find that when somebody is having a legal issue, whether they're big or small, how that just tends to demotivate them and take them back?
Well, certainly any kind of a distraction can lead to a demotivation in the sense that you're not focusing on your core business. And so I guess that's a lack of motivation in a certain sense. But I also see often the opposite of that is when someone is engaged in a legal battle, they often are highly motivated, sometimes not healthily motivated, because sometimes the legal battles that businesses and people find themselves in, it can just human nature that it's very difficult sometimes to think of those business disputes as business disputes and not to make them personal. And so I find that often business owners, and the closer they are to the problem and the closer they are to the dispute, often the more motivated they are to fight. And sometimes that's the right answer. Sometimes that's exactly what you need to do. But I'd say more often than not, in the majority of situations, trying to find a way to avoid the fight would be a better use of the company's resources and motivation. So when clients come to me with these sorts of problems, and sometimes you just can't help it. If you're the defendant, you have no choice. It's not your decision. No one ever chooses to be a defendant in a lawsuit. But even if if your company is the defendant and someone else is suing your company, often there are ways to resolve the case that don't involve going to the United States Supreme Court. So sometimes you have no choice. You have to fight as long and as hard and go as far as you can. And sometimes that's the right answer. But before you just assume that that's the right answer, you need to look at the big picture and try to take a holistic approach to what's the right outcome for the business. And sometimes it's the ideal outcome is a very lengthy and expensive goal to achieve, and sometimes a slightly less than ideal outcome might be the right answer when the business is thinking logically about it. And I don't know if that answers your question about motivation, but in my world, much of my work resolves around disputes that businesses have, either with other businesses or with employees, with competitors, with the government, with vendors, contractors. And so that's where I tend to see motivation focused. I also do some transactional work, and that's the good kind of motivation where somebody is trying to do a deal with another business and they're trying to seize on an opportunity. And that's the kind of positive, exciting motivation you like to see.
That's a good point. And I can understand how a business owner works very hard to grow his business, to start from scratch, basically, to exceed his goals each year. And then a issue can crop up. Sometimes, the customer is not always right, but in the legal sense, something may cause you to come to battle with somebody, and your natural ego, that you've built up because of your business, takes over, and you want to win. But sometimes you need to, it's a game of chess, and conceding is often the better way to win.
Well, it's, uh, business owners are entrepreneurial by nature. They are people who tend to have um, positive attitudes about things, or at least they have a history of succeeding in their endeavors. And I've known a lot of successful business people who seem to get by on sheer force of will alone. And that really can, they have a track record with that in the business context, and they kind of assume that same approach will work in litigation, and it sadly just doesn't. You have to have a different kind of strategy, and I sometimes tell clients, anger is not a strategy. You can be as angry as you want. You can express that to me. I will listen. I'm here. Part of my role is I'm attorney and counselor, and so sure, cry on my shoulders, get it off your chest. But there's no rule that I've ever seen in the law that says that the angriest party wins. And so at some point you have to get past your anger. You have to get past what you perceive as the unfairness of it all, and come up with an actual strategy that's going to hopefully help you win a trial or resolve the case short of trial if that's the goal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, do you feel that all businesses should have a legal counsel?
Well, I guess the natural answer is probably the one you're expecting would be to say yes. Um, I don't know that everyone necessarily needs to have a lawyer on speed dial. There are, so I guess it might be helpful to share just a little bit about my history. I've been practicing law. I'm in my 25th year now. And I started at what still is the biggest firm in St. Louis, representing big corporations. From there, I moved to the St. Louis office of what's now the biggest law firm in the world, also representing big corporations. And moved in-house to what was then a Fortune 500 company. It's now Fortune 100, but I handled overseeing their litigation in 35 states. Those kinds of clients, yes, they need lawyers.
There's always something that.
Yes, and they have the big companies have in-house legal departments, so they hire a lot of outside lawyers also, but they have a lot of, when I was in-house, I was part of a team of lawyers who would interact with the business people at the company and then hire outside counsel when we needed it. The clientele I have now is more of a range. I still have a Fortune 100 company as a client and another Fortune 500. But most of my clients are more mid-size businesses. I've got probably my biggest local client has revenues in the $50 to $100 million range, but they're kind of unusual. Usually it's 10 million or less for the kind of clients I have now. And so I've served as sort of outside general counsel for a few different companies, and I probably was on speed dial for them. But it kind of depends.
You've also opened up to smaller companies, as I understand, with roundtables in the past.
Absolutely. And I even represent individuals. So that's one of the things I enjoy about my job is there's a lot of variety to it, both in terms of the nature of the work and the types of clients I have, and that keeps it fun for me. So I think it would be disingenuous for me to tell you that every business needs a lawyer for every single situation. Because sometimes, but I'm very candid with clients when they call me and say, hey, do I need to get you involved in this? And often the answer is, well, here, let me give you some free advice. Here's what I would do if I were in your situation. I would try these 3 or 4 steps, and maybe that gets you where you need to be, and you don't need to involve a lawyer at all. And so I get some enjoyment out of helping clients self-navigate sometimes when it's appropriate. And if it's especially if it's a small dollar dispute, it may not be economically feasible to involve a lawyer. The other thing I would say, however, is if you're not sure, it is better to get a lawyer involved earlier rather than later, because often the sooner legal counsel gets involved, the they just have a better chance of steering the client in the right direction to hopefully avoid some problems that can become more difficult as time goes on. So what I like to say is my job is helping businesses solve problems that can't be avoided and to avoid problems that can't be solved. And so sometimes, what's the phrase, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's, I think, often true when it comes to legal issues. If you're not sure, find out. And hopefully if you have a scrupulous lawyer, he or she will tell you whether you really need their services or not.
I think a lot of small businesses who may have started out even from these COVID times that they may have worked for somebody and then job situations changed and your psychology has changed a little bit through COVID and you strike out on your own and maybe you use one of those online services to establish your business and you get going and if you've never worked with a lawyer before, I think everybody might be under the assumption that, oh, as soon as I pick up that phone call, I'm on the clock and it's going to cost me. So how can you shed some light on that subject?
Well, that's a really good point. And that is true with a lot of lawyers, and you have to know what the arrangement is up front. There's a lot of discussion in the legal community today about alternative billing arrangements. In the old days, everything was done 100%, at least on the, except for cases which were contingent fee cases, like personal injury cases where a lawyer is paid a percentage of the recovery. Setting that aside, for the kinds of lawyers that businesses tend to need, the traditional way of doing things is hourly. There's been a lot of discussion more recently about experimenting with either flat fees. So the lawyer tries to say up front, here's what this entire thing will cost from start to finish. And it's sort of like getting a bid from a contractor for repairs on your house. You know, in the beginning, what it's going to cost at the end. For some types of legal work, I think that works really well. So for example, if a client comes to me and says, I need a contract, here's who the other party is, here's generally what it needs to accomplish, I can be pretty accurate, I think, in
estimating the boundaries, what's expected.
Because if I know roughly how long that's going to take me to do it, and if it takes longer than it should, that's on me, that's fine. But especially if it's something I've done a lot of, I can pretty well assess the fair market value of that. When it comes to litigation, where you're in a dispute where you don't know how the other side is going to behave, you don't know what kind of motions they're going to file, you don't know what kind of games they're going to play, you don't know how many times you're going to have to go into court to get things back on track. I think those cases, it really is hard to kind of predict up front. I always have a budget. I'll give clients an estimate of what they can expect, and I never want to surprise a client on a bill. So I don't do any work ever that they weren't expecting me to do. And I try to send my bills out once a month, so it doesn't pile up. That's a mistake a lot of lawyers, especially smaller firm lawyers, make, is they'll not send out a bill for 6 months, and now all of a sudden the client gets something that would have been much easier to absorb in bite-sized pieces, and on a monthly basis rather than having 6 months worth of bills to pay. But as far as phone calls with clients go, I think this varies from lawyer to lawyer. I tend to be pretty generous with my time on the phone with clients. Sometimes sometimes you have to bill for your time on that. But if somebody just calls up and has a 5 or 10 minute question, my practice, and again, everyone is different, but mine is I generally don't bill for that because I want people to be comfortable to call and ask questions, and I want them to know where they stand, what the status of their case is or their project. And I think in terms of not being surprised by those, those bills for every time the lawyer's thinking about your case or talking on the phone or responding to an email. I think it's a good conversation to have up front with the lawyers, so you know what their approach is to that, so that you're not surprised when you get the bill.
Well, I understand exactly what you have to do when it comes to billing, because you're in a service business. I'm in a service business. A plumber is in a service business. All you have is yourself and your knowledge and what you bring to the table. So in a phone call, there could be service involved in that is very helpful.
Absolutely.
You know, and sometimes the phone call is not necessarily like you say, you know, a little free advice goes a long way, and it also builds rapport with your clients.
Exactly right. And that's everything I do. I tell people I try to be the kind of lawyer that I would want to refer to my own mother if she needed a lawyer. I think that's a pretty good benchmark.
So have you ever, when you bill in your billing, have you ever counted for time and shown time that you don't bill for?
Absolutely. This is it's a pretty common thing to get a bill. And I recommend this to clients as well who are in the service industry. My hourly rate is what I consider to be a very fair rate for someone with
your expertise.
My experience. And I think it's both fair to the client and to me. And I generally do not discount my hourly rate, because I want clients to understand that there is a value to the time that they get from me. But what I do is I try to, there will be times on bills where you'll see, and depending on how much I do for a particular client in a particular month, there may be 2 or 3 hours of time where I say courtesy not billed. So they get to see what I did for them. But they also see the value of the time that I've kind of written off. And sometimes that's because something takes me longer than I think it should, and I don't want to have to bill the client for it. Maybe it's something that I really think needs to be done, but I haven't picked up the phone to call the client and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. I want you, can I have your permission? I'll just do it, but then I won't bill for it. Sometimes it's just easier that way. And sometimes it's just truly a matter of courtesy. Like this client is kind of struggling, and I want to help them out a little bit. So, but I think you're exactly right about building goodwill. If you just, if you do 15 hours worth of work and you only bill for 10, and they don't see the 5 that you've written off,
they don't know that
there's no goodwill generated for that.
Exactly. I've continued to do business with many people in the service industry that it was a quick fix. They fixed it. They said no charge. I'm like, wow. Well, I love you very much. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
one of the things, Tony, is what Mark mentioned at the very beginning is the holistic approach. And I think billing comes part of that. That also part of the motivation of how client get engaged, because you do have to view legal aspect as a daily aspect. You cannot be illegal and you cannot be unethical. So if you are on all those dial, as a business owner, as a person, you should be approaching your life holistically. And in fact, what we did in the Small Business Revenue Roundtable with Mark, we were involved for 3 years, right, Mark? And we did very successfully. And multiple business owners came there, and we engaged them there in discussion where we discussed about employee motivation, employee engagement, business owners' own engagement with other things. They need a small team, and some of the business owners cannot afford it because they're so small. But that Small Business Revenue Roundtable was focused on helping them with financial advisor, insurance, law, business coaching, and also perspective of other business owners. And we actually had a business owner who was part of our panel, Billy Dawson. We call him Billy D, a fantastic guy, and he provided a lot of good advice there as well. And I know there's many times Mark was challenged with legal question, but challenge means he can handle any challenge you throw at him. So, Mark, would you like to say some of those questions that you received? And I know one of the one I still remember was employee related. How do you, in a setting like a business, small business owners revenue roundtable, how do you handle questions that come to you and not as a legal advisor, but from legal perspective?
Yeah, that happens all the time where I get questions from clients that aren't necessarily legal questions. When you work with a client long enough and they come to appreciate your advice, legal matters, the scope of the engagement tends to expand sometimes, and they'll ask questions that are business related, life related, all kinds of things. And I enjoy that because there's one of the things that practicing law does, it sort of teaches you a certain way of tackling a problem. And it's the way you sort of have to tackle a legal problem if you want to be successful at it. But that approach also works in a lot of other areas where people have problems, just in terms of dissecting and understanding the problem and understanding what the available options are and the potential consequences of going route A versus route B. And again, looking at the big picture and seeing what's among perhaps a list of less than ideal options, what's the least bad option to take. Sometimes that's the right answer. But in terms of your question about how do I approach a legal question from a client if it's something that I'm not familiar with, I don't know the answer to it. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking or not, but if it is, I'm very candid about that. There are very few questions I can't get an answer to, but I don't feel at all compelled to pretend that I know the answer to every question at all times. And so if somebody comes to me with an area of law that I don't have expertise in, or even if it's an area that I do have a lot of expertise in, and but it's something where I want to double check an answer because the law does change, I'm always very candid about that. And I say, well, here's what the answer probably is. But if you want me to get you a definitive answer, I can. And, I can spend an hour researching it. And here's what that would cost for me to do that. But in the meantime, here's the likely answer. But don't, I've seen, especially in-house lawyers, I think there's a real incentive to try to pretend you know everything about everything at all times. And I think that's a mistake. I think you have to be candid about what you know and what you don't know. And there's no answer at all is better than the wrong answer.
And that is very fascinating, Mark, because you said we don't have answers to all the questions. And as a business owner, we don't know everything and all component of our business. And that's why we need help. Right. And what's fascinating about that small business revenue roundtable that we have done for 3 years is that we wanted all the business owners to come there and participate and not only get the perspective of a business coach, also get the perspective of a lawyer, also get a perspective of risk and other things involved in insurance and financial side of it. We had a financial advisor there. And at the same time, we had other business owners who are participant of that panel. They can, throw ideas to each other or throw their thought process to each other and get a complete picture of what they need. Having a small team of people who can help them and it don't cost them much. And that was the goal for that. And that worked out very well. And it did for 3 years. And we may be bringing it back again. So I wanted to let you know that because that's one of the reasons we are discussing here is the holistic approach of life. Law is no way out of our holistic side. And as you know, if a business owner gets sued, suddenly it becomes holistic of your life, right? Tony, what do you think about that, Tony?
The stress that comes on your life and the answers that you don't know and the ways that things can turn does not allow you to sleep well at night.
Well, that's the fascinating quote about what love got to do with it, right? So we are in love, and when you run into a divorce situation, you will know what is the legality there. So what love got to do with it in a business as well? We fall in love with our business. At the same times, we need to understand there is other consequences that we have to be always do the right thing from the beginning and continue to do that. And that's what I enjoy working with Mark. He's one of the most ethical lawyer I ever met. And
So Mark, what types of law do you specialize in?
Well, as you can guess, probably from the conversation, a big part of what I do is business litigation, representing businesses in all kinds of disputes, whether it's, again, it can be a dispute with a competing business, it can be a dispute with a contractor, a customer, government agency, regulatory body, basically all kinds of disputes for businesses. I do what I call light transactional work, where I'll do help businesses and individuals with contracts, and I do probably about 25% of my work is estate planning for people, and often with business owners, helping them kind of prepare for the succession of how to pass on their business in either in retirement or long after retirement and death, hopefully long after. So that's kind of the main gist of what I do. I also do some personal injury defense for some corporate clients, and on occasion I'll take a personal injury plaintiff's case, usually by referral, if there's an individual who's been injured. I like to do cases on both sides. I've been both a plaintiff's lawyer exclusively and a defense lawyer exclusively, and I like to mix it up because I think one of the things that happens a lot is lawyers who are exclusively on one side or the other, they become
Don't see the other side.
It's really hard to see the other side, because part of our job as advocates is to find, well, it's easy to start believing your own your own stories. Not that you make them up, but just you see your side of it. And it is a constant effort to try to make sure you're seeing the other arguments on the other side. And I just think having cases on both sides really helps with being able to have that perspective. Also really helps in knowing how to properly value a case, because if a case is going to get resolved through settlement, that only happens when lawyers on both sides are realistic and help their clients see things realistically. The cases that tend to get tried, they fall into two categories. The ones where just anything could happen and nobody knows what's going to happen, and both sides have good arguments and you just don't know, so you try it. Or the cases where one side is completely right and the other side's completely wrong, because one side's just not being realistic. The cases where the risk is sort of spread on both sides, and there are sophisticated parties on both sides who recognize it, those cases tend to settle. So what you really want to be careful about is, I mean, sometimes you just roll the dice, you have to, because you think you have a good argument and you're not guaranteed to win, but it's worth the principle, and it's worth rolling the dice. What you don't want is to be that case where you and the other side just completely see things dramatically different, universes apart, and you're the one who's wrong about what's the real value of the case. So I try to avoid that situation.
Fascinating, Mark. And it's surprising how quickly time flies when you are having fun. It's so great to have you here, and we are almost to our end. What would be some of the key things that you want to point out before you leave us today as a legal counsel for any business owner or even personal life?
Well, it's funny. I think you may have known this. There was the Small Business Monthly has an annual section on lawyers, of the 100 lawyers in town for small businesses. And when I was in that, that was one of their questions of, what's your biggest picture advice? And they had a couple of different questions, and this wasn't the question that they ended up publishing, but to me, it's the most important answer to the most important question. What is my general advice for clients? Do the right thing. It's not always easy to know exactly what that is. And so sometimes that's easier said than done. But I've never seen a client who regretted doing the right thing. I've never seen a client regret treating their employees fairly. I've never seen a client who regretted treating their customers fairly and with respect, and even treating their vendors fairly. I think being a good person isn't guaranteed to make you successful, but even if it doesn't, you still have the benefit of having done the right thing. So when in doubt, do the right thing.
Fantastic.
It's good to have on your side.
That doing the right thing is the advice of the day, Tony. And with that, thank you very much, Mark. And Tony, do the right thing.
Mark, would you like to share with us the name of your company or business?
Sure. It's Law Office of Mark Brown, LLC. My website is markbrownlawfirm.com for anyone who's interested.
And your website is right now on our screen. So Mark Brown Law Firm, Law Office of Mark Brown, or Mark Brown Law Firm? Which one is that?
It's the website is Mark Brown Law Firm because that's what fits into a URL. The official name is Law Office of Mark Brown LLC. But or you
and
can
this is an unpaid advertisement.
Yeah, I'm not very good at self-promotion.
The other thing is Mark is actually looking much better now than his picture on the website. So fantastic. So nice.
I get younger every day.
Tony, this is your time to shine.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Mark, for joining us, and Dr. Milu. And this has been another great episode of Coffee with the Coach. And we look forward to seeing you 2 weeks on the first and third Tuesday of each month. Have a great remainder of your summer and a safe Labor Day holiday coming up.